Christmas Eve, the one day of the year that used to mean warmth, laughter, and the smell of pine drifting through the house. This year, it just meant silence. The kind of silence that sits heavy on your chest. I told myself I needed it. After the year I'd had, I needed peace more than anything else in the world. The road to Silver Ridge twisted through the Colorado mountains like a ribbon of black silk, slick with patches of early snow. My tires hummed against the pavement as I climbed higher, the city lights of Boulder fading behind me until all that was left were stars and pine trees. It had been 6 months since I'd last driven this route, but it felt like coming home at least. That's what I thought. The cabin had always been my wife Elaine's dream. 17 years ago, before her illness, she'd pointed to a piece of land on a map and said, "This is where we'll build something no one can touch." Back then, I was still running my engineering firm, still chasing deadlines and city contracts. But on weekends, we'd drive up here, hammer nails, set beams, argue over the stain of the wood until the place began to feel alive. Elaine called it our sanctuary. After cancer took her 3 Christmases ago, it became mine alone. Every wall carried her fingerprint, every stone in the fireplace, her vision. When the world turned loud, I came here. And tonight, I needed it more than ever. The year had started with 3 failed projects. Clients backed out, investors disappeared, lawsuits loomed. My name, Daniel Reeves, once respected in the construction world, had become a whisper people avoided. The phone stopped ringing. My son, Michael, didn't return calls. When I texted him about spending Christmas together, I got a single message back. "Busy, Dad. Maybe next year." That should have hurt. Instead, it felt familiar. Distance had become our pattern. I rounded the final curve that led to the gravel driveway, the place Elaine loved for its view of the frozen lake below. My headlights swept across the pine trunks, then landed on something that made me tap the brakes. 2 vehicles sat in my driveway, a silver SUV and a red crossover I didn't recognize. For a moment, I thought I'd made a mistake. Maybe I'd taken the wrong turn, maybe this wasn't my cabin at all. But the carved wooden sign I'd hung years ago, Reeves' Cabin, still stood beside the gate, my gate. A strange unease prickled the back of my neck. I pulled up slowly, headlights washing over the front porch. The motion sensor light flicked on. The key box beside the door was open, its small metal lid dangling. That key box had a 6-digit code, known only to me and one other person, my son, Michael. "Impossible," I muttered, stepping out of the truck. The air was thin, the night cold enough to sting my lungs. I could hear something faint, drifting through the stillness music. Not just background noise, but the sound of people laughing, glasses clinking, a woman's voice singing off-key to a holiday tune. I froze beside the porch steps, heart thudding. For a second, I wondered if maybe a caretaker had stopped by, or a neighbor using the wrong house by mistake. But as I got closer, the scent hit me. Wood smoke, expensive wine, roasted food. My food cabinet was always empty when I arrived. Whoever was inside had made themselves completely at home. The front door was slightly ajar, warm air spilling into the cold night. I reached out and pushed it open slowly. The hinges creaked, a sound that used to comfort me but now sounded like a warning. What I saw made my stomach twist. The living room glowed with golden light from the fireplace. My furniture had been rearranged, pushed aside to make space for a decorated Christmas tree I didn't own. Empty bottles of champagne lined the coffee table. My mother's quilt was draped across the couch, stained with red wine, and in front of the fire, 7 people were talking and laughing like they'd lived here their whole lives. Strangers, every single one. For a moment, I stood frozen on the threshold, unable to speak. The sound of laughter, the smell of food, the sight of unfamiliar faces in the place Elaine had once called sacred, it was all too surreal. Then, through the haze of confusion, one voice cut through, a voice I knew as well as my own. "Hey, can you grab another bottle of the whiskey from the cabinet?" I turned toward the sound and saw him. Michael, my son. He stood near the stone fireplace, holding a glass in one hand, laughing with a group of people who looked like they'd never known a day of hardship. He was wearing my old wool sweater, the one Elaine knit during our first winter here. For a split second, I thought he'd seen me, but he didn't. He was too busy performing, too comfortable in a place that was never his. Something inside me cracked. My hand tightened on the doorframe as I stepped into the room. Every conversation stopped. Music still played softly from a Bluetooth speaker, but the laughter died instantly. And that was when my son finally turned and his smile vanished. He looked at me as if he'd seen a ghost. Then, slowly, deliberately, he raised his chin and said words I'll never forget. "What's a parasite like you doing in my cabin?" The words hit harder than the cold outside. Christmas Eve had just begun, and peace was the last thing I was going to find. For a moment, I honestly thought I'd misheard him. Maybe it was the music still humming faintly through the speaker, or the wine thick in the air. Maybe my brain just refused to process it. But when I looked at my son, at the cold confidence behind those blue eyes that once held nothing but boyish mischief, I knew he meant it. "What did you just say?" I managed, my voice rough from the cold. Michael's lips twitched in a smile that wasn't really a smile at all. "You heard me. You can't just walk into someone else's house and start gawking like a stray dog." Someone laughed awkwardly, a quick, nervous sound that died just as fast. The woman standing beside him, tall, graceful, maybe late 20s, moved closer to his side. She looked at me with the kind of concern people reserve for unstable strangers. "Michael, who is this man?" He slipped an arm around her shoulder like a shield. "No idea, babe. Probably some local drifter who saw lights and thought he'd come warm himself by the fire." Drifter. The word hit harder than the mountain wind. I looked around the room slowly, at the faces that had turned toward me in a mixture of confusion and mild discomfort. There were 7 of them in total, 4 adults, 2 teenagers, and a gray-haired man I guessed was the woman's father. They were dressed in designer sweaters and polished boots, people clearly used to money. My gaze fell on the dining table, the one Elaine had insisted we hand-carve from reclaimed oak. It was set for dinner, the plates full, candles burning low. They'd been celebrating Christmas Eve. In my home. "Michael," I said quietly, trying to keep my voice steady, "this is my cabin. You know that." Something flickered across his face, panic, maybe, but it was gone before I could be sure. He straightened, his posture suddenly theatrical, his tone louder and sharper. "Sir, I'm going to ask you to leave before I call the sheriff. You're trespassing on private property." The woman frowned. "Wait, how did he know your name?" Michael didn't miss a beat. Coincidence? Reeves is a common last name around here. Her parents, I realize now, that's who they must be, exchanged uncertain glances. The older man set down his wineglass. "Michael, you said this cabin was your inheritance. From your grandfather, wasn't it?" "Yes," Michael said too quickly. "Yes, of course. Family property for generations." "Family property," I repeated softly. "That's one way to put it." Michael's head snapped toward me, eyes flashing. "I'm serious, old man. Get out before I have you arrested." Old man. He'd called me dad his entire life, but now, surrounded by strangers, he acted like I was a piece of dirt under his shoe. I took a slow step forward. "You remember building that fireplace with me, don't you? You were 12. You kept complaining about the mortar getting on your hands." The older woman, the mother, I assumed, tilted her head, confused. "Michael, what's he talking about?" He laughed lightly, almost too lightly. "Ma'am, I'm sorry you have to hear this. This guy's clearly confused. Probably some lonely retiree who thinks he knows us." Every word was a blade. I looked around again, my gaze landing on the mantel above the fireplace. For a second, my breath caught. The framed photograph that had always sat there, the one of Elaine and me on the day we finished the cabin, sawdust still on our clothes. Her smile, brighter than the sun, was gone. In its place hung a stock family portrait of Michael and his fiancée, both smiling in coordinated red sweaters. I felt something inside me splinter. "Where's the photo?" I asked quietly. "The what?" Michael's voice was sharper now. "The picture of your mother and me. It used to hang there." He hesitated just a beat too long. Then he shrugged. "Oh, that? I took it down." It didn't match the Christmas decorations. "You took it down?" I whispered. "That photo's been there for 17 years. His fiancée, Heather," I heard someone call her, frowned. "Michael, you told me your parents passed away years ago." The room froze. Her words hung in the air like frost. Michael's face drained of color, but he forced a weak laugh. "You must have misheard me." "No," she said softly, eyes narrowing. "You said your father died when you were in college." Everyone stared at him now. The silence stretched, taut as a wire. Then Michael snapped. "All right, enough. This lunatic broke into our cabin and is trying to start trouble. I don't know how he knew the code, but I'm calling the police." He pulled out his phone and dialed, pacing near the window. I could hear his voice shaking slightly as he said, "Yes, we have an intruder at 127 Silver Ridge Road. He's claiming he owns the place." When he hung up, his hand trembled just enough for me to notice. "Michael," I said quietly, "why are you doing this?" He wouldn't meet my eyes. The woman's father, a tall man with silver hair and sharp eyes, spoke up finally. "If this cabin is yours, sir, you can prove it easily enough. You said you're Daniel Reeves, right?" "That's right." "And you built this place?" "With my wife, Elaine." Michael's jaw tightened. The man looked between us, thoughtful. Then the sheriff consorted out. The sound of sirens echoed faintly through the valley, a slow, rising wail that grew louder by the second. Michael exhaled sharply and muttered, "Good. Let's see him try to lie his way out of this." I looked at him, really looked at him. The boy I'd raised was gone. In his place stood a man I barely recognized, nervous, arrogant, drowning in lies so deep he couldn't see daylight. The sirens grew louder. Red and blue lights flickered through the frosted windows, painting the walls with color. For the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of what came next. Because I already knew the truth, and I knew it would destroy him. The sirens stopped outside, and for a brief moment the entire cabin went silent, except for the wind pushing against the windows. The laughter, the music, the warmth that had filled the air minutes ago, all of it vanished, replaced by tension so thick it was almost suffocating. 2 sets of heavy boots crunched over the snow outside. The front door swung open without knocking, and 2 deputies stepped inside. One was a middle-aged man with a weathered face and calm, steady eyes. The other, a younger woman, scanned the room quickly, her hand resting lightly on her holster. "Evening," the older one said, his voice level but firm. "We got a report about a break-in?" Before I could answer, Michael spoke first, smooth and confident. "Yes, officer. This man broke in about 20 minutes ago. He's been shouting and making threats. I don't know how he got in." The words hit me harder than a punch. I turned toward him slowly. "Shouting? Threats? You called me a parasite, Michael, and now you're lying to the police?" "Sir," the female deputy interrupted, "I'll need you to stay calm." Calm. It was almost funny, the way she said it, because calm was all I'd been trying to hold on to since I'd walked through that door and realized my own son had erased me from his life. I took a slow breath. "Officers, my name is Daniel Reeves. This is my property. I built this cabin with my late wife, Elaine, in 2006. The deed, tax receipts, and keys are all in my truck right outside." Michael let out a short, incredulous laugh. "See? He's delusional. My name is on the deed. I inherited this place after my grandfather died 2 years ago." One of the guests, a man in his 60s, tall and dignified, looked sharply at Michael. "Michael, you never mentioned a grandfather who owned mountain property." Michael froze, the muscles in his jaw tightening. "You must have forgotten. I told you." "No, you didn't," the man said, his voice growing colder. "You said your parents died when you were a teenager." A ripple of unease spread through the room. The lies were starting to buckle under their own weight. The older deputy, whose name tag read Lyle Benton, turned to me. "Mr. Reeves, you said your documents are outside?" "Yes, sir." He nodded toward his partner. "Ruth, go with him and grab them. Let's clear this up." I followed her out to the truck, my breath fogging in the icy air. Inside the glove compartment was a manila folder I'd brought from my lawyer's office just 2 days earlier. I handed it to her, feeling my hands shake not from fear, but from the sheer heartbreak of what this moment had become. When we stepped back inside, all eyes were on us. Sheriff Benton spread the papers across the dining table, my table, and ran his flashlight over the embossed county seals. "These documents," he said slowly, "show Daniel Reeves as the registered owner of this property since 2006. Taxes have been paid annually under his name. The insurance policy also lists his late wife, Elaine Reeves." Silence. I could feel everyone watching Michael. The color drained from his face. He stammered, "That there's a mistake. He must have forged those." "Forged them?" Benton's brow furrowed. "The county clerk's seal doesn't lie." Michael's fiancée, Heather, stepped closer. "Michael, what's going on?" He wouldn't look at her. He's been stalking me. You don't understand. He probably watched me enter the gate code, or I couldn't take it anymore. "Stop!" My voice was calm, but sharp enough to slice through the lies. Everyone turned toward me. "You're standing in the home your mother and I built. The home where we spent every Christmas before you decided you were too busy to come." My throat tightened. "Your mother's photo used to hang right there, above that fireplace. You replaced it with a picture of yourself." Heather's eyes darted to the mantel, confusion turning into realization. "Michael, that's why you never let me see the old photos, isn't it?" He tried to speak, but no words came out. The older man, Heather's father, Edward, looked like he'd just been struck. "My God," he whispered, "you lied to all of us." The truth hung there, heavy and undeniable. Michael finally snapped. "What was I supposed to do, huh? You cut me off, Dad. You left me with nothing while you sat up here hiding from the world. You owed me something after all those years." "Owed you?" My voice trembled, half fury, half grief. "I gave you everything. Your education, your first business loan, every chance to make something of yourself. And what did you do? You destroyed every one of them." He stepped closer, shaking, his voice rising. "You think you're some saint? You couldn't save Mom, and you couldn't save me. You're nothing but a bottom feeder, hiding in a cabin pretending to be important." The words hit me like a blade, straight to the chest. For a heartbeat, I saw only his mother's face, how proud she used to be of him, how she'd held my hand and whispered, "Take care of him, Daniel. He's got your fire. Don't let it burn him alive." And standing there now, in the ruins of that promise, I realized I had failed both of them. The sheriff's voice cut through the air. "That's enough." But it wasn't enough. Not yet. Michael had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. I looked at him, really looked, and said quietly, "You're right about one thing. I can't save you. Not anymore." The room went still. Outside, snow began to fall, soft, steady, silent. Inside, something inside me finally broke loose. Because sometimes, it's not the first betrayal that hurts the most. It's realizing the person you love has been rehearsing it for years. Sheriff Benton stood there for a long moment, staring at Michael, as if he were trying to decide whether to treat him as a suspect or as a son caught in something far worse than a simple lie. The fire crackled behind us, throwing soft light over faces that had gone pale with shock. Outside, snow pressed silently against the windows, blurring the world beyond. "All right," Benton said at last, his voice measured. "Let's slow down before this turns into something uglier than it already is." He turned toward Michael. "You said you have documentation showing ownership?" Michael swallowed hard, then nodded too quickly. Yes, I do." He walked over to a leather briefcase sitting by the couch, one I recognized immediately. It had been mine, a retirement gift from my old engineering firm. He pulled out a stack of printed pages and handed them to the sheriff with trembling fingers. "Here," he said, "this is the transfer. My father signed it over to me 2 years ago. I have the digital records too." Heather flinched when he said father. Until now, she had clung to the illusion that I was lying, that there had to be some misunderstanding. But hearing him admit who I was, even as he twisted the truth, shattered that illusion. Benton studied the papers under his flashlight, brow furrowing. "These look fresh. And this signature," he paused, glancing up at me, "looks off." I stepped closer. My own name, Daniel Reeves, sprawled in faint blue ink across the bottom of the page, crooked, uneven, and wrong. I'd signed my name 1,000 times in my life. I could recognize the forgery from 6 feet away. "That's not my signature," I said quietly. Michael's face tightened. "You don't remember, that's all. You signed it when we updated your estate plan." "Estate plan?" I repeated, stunned. "I never—" The sheriff raised a hand. "All right, let's not shout over each other." He glanced toward his deputy. "Ruth, call dispatch. Ask them to check the property record history under Reeves' name. I want to know if there's been any recent filing activity in the past 24 months. As she stepped outside to radio, Benton turned to the others. "Nobody leaves until we get this sorted." The guests sat stiffly, eyes darting between me and Michael. Edward Clark, Heather's father, looked furious, but not at me. His wife, Mary Ann, pressed a trembling hand to her mouth, whispering something that sounded like, "My God, we gave him money." "What money?" Benton asked, sharp as a knife. Edward hesitated, then looked directly at him. "My wife and I were preparing to invest $40,000 in a business Michael said he was starting. He told us this cabin was collateral, that he owned it, free and clear." Heather turned, eyes wide with betrayal. "Michael, tell me that's not true." He tried to speak, but Ruth returned, her breath visible in the cold air she'd let in from outside. "Sheriff," she said, holding up her phone. "County records show a pending transfer filed last week, but it hasn't been approved. It lists Daniel Reeves as seller and Michael Reeves as buyer. The signature on file looks digital." Benton's expression hardened. "Digital signature fraud is a felony." Heather backed away from Michael, one hand over her mouth. "You were going to sell the cabin? The one your father built with your mother?" Michael's composure cracked. "You don't understand," he said hoarsely. "I didn't have a choice. The investors were threatening to pull out. I was going to fix everything once the deal went through." "Fix everything?" I repeated, my voice quiet but shaking with anger. "By selling the only thing your mother left behind? By erasing every memory she ever built here?" He turned toward me, then the arrogance gone, replaced by desperation. "You were never there for me, Dad. You spent your life buried in work, buried in grief. I just wanted one thing that was mine." "This was never just mine, Michael," I said, taking a step closer. "It was ours. Yours, mine, and your mother's. You didn't need to steal it to belong to it." The words hung between us, thick and heavy. Sheriff Benton cleared his throat, breaking the moment. "Mr. Reeves," he said, looking at me, "you've got clear legal ownership. There's no question there. The only issue is what you want to do next." I looked at him blankly. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Benton continued carefully, "you can press charges for fraud and false reporting. It's clear your son tried to claim ownership and call in a fake break-in. That's serious. We can take him in tonight, if that's what you want." The room went completely still. Heather's father muttered, "He deserves it." But I couldn't speak. My throat had closed. For years, I'd pictured reunions with my son not like this, not surrounded by officers, not with my wife's ghost watching from every corner of the cabin she loved. I turned to Michael, really seeing him for the first time, not as a liar, not as a grown man, but as a broken child standing on a cliff he'd built himself. His shoulders sagged, his eyes glassy with shame and fear. "Dad," he whispered, "please don't do this." I exhaled slowly. The sound that came out of me wasn't quite a sigh, more like something cracking open. "No," I said at last. "I won't press charges." Benton raised an eyebrow. "You sure about that?" "I'm sure." Heather looked at me, astonished. "After everything he's done?" "I'll deal with him myself," I said softly. The sheriff nodded, though his expression told me he didn't agree. "All right, we'll file this as a civil matter. But if any more fraudulent paperwork shows up, I'll have to act." He started packing his papers, and the tension in the room loosened slightly. But inside me, something else tightened, something final. Michael exhaled in relief, as if I'd given him mercy. But he had no idea what mercy really looked like. Because what I planned to do next would hurt him far more than any jail cell ever could. I turned to the sheriff. "Thank you, officers. I think I know exactly how to handle this." He nodded once. "I'll leave you to it, Mr. Reeves." As the door shut behind them, I faced my son. The fear in his eyes told me he could sense it, that the man who used to save him had finally decided to stop. The storm outside grew heavier, snow falling in thick, silent waves. Inside, the reckoning was just beginning. The front door had barely closed behind the sheriff when the room erupted. Heather's mother, Marianne, shot to her feet. "You lied to us," she said, her voice trembling but sharp as glass. "You lied about everything, your family, your inheritance, your business." Her husband, Edward, was less controlled. "We almost wired you $40,000, he growled. $40,000! You were going to use stolen property as collateral, weren't you?" Michael opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The confidence he'd worn like armor was gone, replaced by something I hadn't seen in years: fear. Heather stood near the fireplace, arms crossed tightly over her chest. She was pale, her eyes glistening with tears she refused to shed. "All those nights, you said you were stressed because of investors. All those phone calls you took outside, you were lying to me, too." "Please," Michael whispered, stepping toward her. "I was trying to fix things. I was doing it for us." "Don't," she cut him off, "don't you dare use us to justify what you've done." The quiet fury in her tone made him flinch. I stayed silent, watching it unfold, feeling something hollow expand inside me. This wasn't the first time Michael's lies had caused damage, but it was the first time I'd let him face the wreckage himself. He turned toward me finally, eyes pleading. "Dad, please, tell them I didn't mean to." "I think they already know what you meant to do," I said quietly. He froze. For a moment, I saw him as he used to be, the little boy who once stood on this very floor with scraped knees and a crooked grin, asking if his mother's cookies were ready yet. Elaine had always believed he was destined for great things. "He's got your drive, Daniel," she'd say. "He just needs guidance." But drive without conscience becomes destruction. "I won't call the police," I said, my voice level. "You won't go to jail tonight, but you're done lying your way through life at my expense." Michael's mouth opened, confusion flickering. "What are you talking about?" I took a step forward, pulling my phone from my pocket. "You've lived off me for 6 years. I paid for your apartment, your car, your insurance, your credit cards. You've borrowed money, promised to pay it back, and never did. All because I believed that helping you would make you better." Heather's eyes widened. "You paid for all of that?" "Every cent," I said. "He told me it was temporary, that he just needed a bridge until his business stabilized. I wanted to believe him. God help me, I did." Michael's face crumpled. "Dad, please, not in front of them." I didn't answer. Instead, I opened the banking app and held it up for everyone to see. Rows of payments glowed in blue light. Rent transfers, car loans, credit card auto pays. $2,800 a month for your apartment, I read aloud. $847 for the BMW, health, auto, and renter's insurance under my policy. Credit cards with a $12,000 balance I've been paying off for years. Heather made a small choking sound. "You told me your salary covered everything." Michael's voice broke. "I was going to pay him back." "No," I said softly. "You were going to keep taking until there was nothing left." Silence. Only the crackle of the fire filled the room. Then I did something that made him go still as stone. I began canceling the payments, one by one. Chime. Apartment subsidy canceled. Chime. Car loan payment canceled. Chime. Credit card auto pay terminated. Each sound echoed like a closing door. "Dad," he whispered, stepping forward, "you can't do this. I'll lose everything." "You already lost everything the moment you called me a parasite in my own home." He stopped moving, his face drained of color. Heather's parents gathered their coats in silence. Marianne's hands were trembling as she clutched her purse. "Mr. Reeves," she said quietly, "I'm so sorry for this mess. We had no idea. You don't owe me an apology, I replied. You were lied to, just like I was. Edward gave Michael one last look, something between pity and disgust. If you ever contact us again, I'll press charges myself. Heather stood in the doorway, her face unreadable. I thought I married a man with ambition, she said softly. Turns out, I married a thief with a gift for pretending. She left without another word. When the sound of engines finally faded down the road, only Michael and I were left. He stood in the middle of the living room, surrounded by the debris of his lies, half-empty glasses, crumpled napkins, and a toppled photo of Elaine and me that I quietly set upright. Dad, he said finally, his voice cracking. I messed up. I know that. But I'm still your son. Yes, I said. And that's the only reason you're not in handcuffs right now. He took a shaky breath. Can we just talk, please? I looked at him for a long time, my chest tight. There's nothing left to say tonight. Pack your things. You and your friends need to leave my property. He stared at me, disbelief and panic warring in his eyes. You can't be serious. It's freezing outside. I was serious the moment I stopped making excuses for you. The fire snapped sharply behind us, the only sound in the heavy silence that followed. Finally, he turned and walked down the hall toward the guest room. I listened to the slow, deliberate zipping of bags, the shuffle of shoes, the faint rustle of a man who had just lost everything but his shame. When the front door shut behind him, I stood by the window and watched the red glow of taillights snake down the mountain road until they disappeared into darkness. The cabin was quiet again. The peace I'd come here to find had returned, but it felt hollow, fragile, almost foreign. For 35 years, I'd been Michael's father. For the last 6, I'd been his safety net. Tonight, I'd become something else entirely, his consequence. And though it broke something deep inside me, I knew Elaine would have understood. Because sometimes the only way to save someone is to stop saving them. I stood there for a long time after the sound of his car faded into the trees. The clock above the mantel ticked softly, its rhythm filling the hollow stillness left behind. The cabin smelled like burnt pine and spilled wine. My son's laughter still seemed to echo faintly from the walls. But it wasn't real, it was just memory, clinging to the wood like smoke. I sank into the old leather chair by the fire, the one Elaine used to curl up in when she read on winter nights. My hands trembled slightly as I pulled out my phone again. On the screen, my bank accounts glowed in pale blue light. Dozens of automatic payments lined the list like an accusation proof of 6 years of blind faith and denial. Rent, utilities, credit cards, car payments, insurance, thousands of dollars flowing out of my account every month, keeping a man afloat who'd long forgotten how to swim. I opened the first one, his apartment rental, $2,800 a month, always paid on time, always by me. I hovered over the cancel recurring payment button, my finger shaking. Then I pressed it. Chime. The sound was small but final, like a lock turning. Next came the car loan. He loved that black BMW more than anything, treated it like a badge of success. He used to tell people it was his reward for working hard. I smiled bitterly. My thumb moved again. Chime. The credit cards followed, 3 of them. Each one held a story I didn't want to remember. Vacations he couldn't afford. Business dinners that were really nights out. Promises to pay it all back soon. Chime. 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 Finally, I reached the insurance policies, auto, health, renters, all under my name, all covering him. When I canceled those, my chest felt both lighter and heavier at the same time. When I was done, I looked at the list again. For the first time in years, it was empty. No more lifelines. The cabin was silent, except for the faint hiss of the fire. I leaned back, closing my eyes, and let the reality settle. This wasn't revenge. This wasn't punishment. This was survival mine, and, in a strange way, his too. For years, I had mistaken enabling for love. I'd thought covering his failures meant protecting him from pain. But pain was how people learned. Pain was how I learned after Elaine died how to live without her, how to rebuild, how to find purpose in an empty house. I'd robbed Michael of that. I'd built him a life where consequences didn't exist. And tonight, I'd finally taken it away. I picked up the framed photo from the hearth, the one of Elaine and me standing outside the cabin the day we finished it. She was wearing a wool hat, cheeks pink from the cold, smiling like she already knew what this place would become. "I did what you asked," I whispered to her photo. "I took care of him. But I should have listened better. You didn't mean to protect him from everything, did you? You meant guide him until he could stand." The flames crackled softly in answer. Outside, snow fell in slow, delicate spirals. I stayed up for hours that night, watching the fire burn low. Every sound in the cabin felt amplified, the groan of the rafters, the pop of a log, the faint whistle of wind through the eaves. It was the same silence I'd come here to find, but it didn't feel peaceful, not yet. Before going to bed, I sent one final message. To Michael Reeves. Subject: no more. You will receive no more payments from me. The car, apartment, and cards are in your name. Handle them as an adult. You need to face what you've built. I won't rescue you again. Dad. I didn't sign it with love. For once, I wanted my words to stand without comfort. I turned off the lights and walked into the bedroom. The sheets were cold. The cabin, once filled with voices and laughter, now felt too large for one person, but somehow I preferred it that way. In the faint glow of the fire, I thought of something my father used to tell me when I was Michael's age. There's a difference between giving someone a hand and giving them a crutch. I'd spent years pretending I didn't understand what he meant. Now, staring into the darkness, I finally did. The first call came the next morning. I saw the name flash on my phone before I even finished my coffee. Michael. For a long moment, I just watched the screen light up and fade out again. Then I turned the phone face down on the table and stared out the window at the falling snow. The second call came an hour later. The third, that afternoon. By nightfall, there were 6 missed calls and 2 text messages. "Dad, please call me. I just need to talk." I didn't respond. The silence wasn't out of anger anymore, it was out of necessity. For years, I'd answered every call, every crisis, every broken promise. This time, I had to let silence do what my words never could. By the end of the week, the messages had changed. Day 3. We're staying in a motel. I'll fix this, I swear. Day 5. Heather's parents cut us off. She's furious. Please, just talk to me. Day 7. Dad, we have nowhere to go. Please, I'm begging you. Each one was shorter, shakier, written later at night. Guilt gnawed at me, but I forced myself to keep reading without answering. This was what accountability looked like. Painful, necessary. That Sunday morning, the phone rang again. The number was different this time, unfamiliar. I shouldn't have answered, but my hand moved before my mind caught up. Dad, please don't hang up. His voice was barely more than a whisper, hoarse and hollow. We're living in my car now, he said after a long pause. Heather's gone. Her parents told her to come home. They said they want nothing to do with me. The sound of his breath hitched on the other end. I'm sorry for what I said that night. I was scared. Everything was falling apart and I didn't know what to do. I closed my eyes. The fire beside me popped, and for a second I could see Elaine sitting there, her eyes full of sympathy and worry, the way she always looked at him when he was young. Michael, I said slowly, you've said that before. No, this time I mean it. I swear I do. I'll get a job. Anything. I just need a little help, just until I can get back on my feet. The same plea I'd heard 100 times. I almost gave in, almost. But then a voice came through faintly in the background. Heather, sharp and furious. Tell him what you did, Michael. Tell him how you lied to everyone. Tell him how my parents almost lost their savings. There was a muffled argument, voices overlapping, the thud of a door slamming. Then, silence again. When he spoke next, his voice was small. She's leaving me, Dad. I didn't say anything. She said I destroyed her family's trust, he continued. She's right. isn't she?" The question hung in the air like a confession. Finally, I said, "Yes, she's right." He didn't argue. For the first time in years, he didn't defend himself. I heard him inhale shakily. "I just wanted you to be proud of me. That's all I ever wanted." "Pride isn't something you can buy with lies, son," I said quietly. "It's something you earn when you face the truth." "I know," he whispered. "I know." The line went dead a few seconds later. I sat there in the dim light for a long time, phone still in my hand, the screen dark and cold. Somewhere out there, my son was sitting in his car, watching his world collapse. It broke my heart, but it was a heart I'd had to rebuild from his betrayals too many times already. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked outside instead, the air sharp and clear, the snow crunching under my boots. The mountains loomed tall and silent around me, their peaks glinting faintly under the moonlight. The same mountains that had once made Elaine feel safe, that had become my refuge. For the first time, I realized they weren't just beautiful, they were indifferent. They didn't care who you were or what mistakes you'd made. They simply stood, year after year, unshaken by the storms that passed through. Maybe that was the lesson I needed to learn. That peace doesn't come from fixing everything, it comes from standing firm through it. When I went back inside, I checked my phone one last time before turning in. No new messages. I set it face down again, turned off the lights, and let the silence fill the space Elaine once called our sanctuary. For the first time in years, the silence didn't hurt. It felt like healing. And though I didn't know what tomorrow would bring for my son, I knew one thing for certain. This was the beginning of his reckoning and my peace. 4 months passed before I heard from him again. Spring had come to Silver Ridge. The snow had melted into clear streams that wound down the mountainsides. The air smelled of pine and wet earth. Each morning, sunlight spilled through the windows of the cabin, lighting the dust in golden threads. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something close to peace. I spent my days fixing what winter had broken, the porch steps that had warped from the frost, the old fence that leaned toward the valley. There was something healing about it. Each nail I hammered, each board I replaced, made the cabin feel whole again. The silence, once heavy, had become comfortable. Then, one quiet morning, my phone buzzed. The number was unknown. For a long time, I just stared at it, my thumb hovering over the screen. Part of me wanted to let it ring out like I always did, but something, maybe instinct, maybe mercy, made me answer. "Dad?" It was Michael. His voice sounded different. Not the confident, arrogant tone I'd heard on Christmas Eve. Not the hollow desperation from that night in the car. This voice was steady but soft, stripped bare. "I got a new job," he said after a pause. "Warehouse work in Colorado Springs. It's not much, but it's honest. I'm renting a small place near the bus stop." I didn't speak. I just listened, waiting for the real reason behind the call. "I'm not calling for money," he added quickly, as if reading my mind. "I just wanted to tell you that." The wind whispered through the pines outside the window. For the first time in months, I heard something in his voice that I hadn't heard since he was a boy. Truth. "I'm proud of you for working," I said quietly. He laughed once, weakly. "That's the first time you've said that in years." "That's the first time you've given me reason to," I replied. Silence stretched between us, but it wasn't hostile anymore, just heavy with things that didn't need to be said aloud. After a while, he spoke again. "I want to apologize, Dad, for everything, for what I said, for what I did. I know you were just trying to help. I was angry at myself, not you." I leaned back in my chair and stared out at the lake glimmering in the sunlight. "Anger has a way of disguising itself as pride," I said. "You're not the first to fall for it." "I don't expect you to forgive me," he said softly. "I just wanted you to know I'm trying." The truth was, I had forgiven him months ago, but forgiveness and trust aren't the same thing. Forgiveness is mercy. Trust is earned. "I believe you're trying," I said finally, "and that's a start." "Could we maybe start over someday?" he asked, his voice uncertain. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to say yes right then, to tell him to come home, to make us whole again. But another part, the wiser one, knew that starting over didn't mean going backward. It meant both of us moving forward, separately, until we could meet again, as equals. Maybe someday, I said gently, but not today. There was no anger in my voice, and he didn't protest. He just breathed out, long and quiet, like he understood. I love you, Dad, he said finally. I closed my eyes. I love you too, son. Then the line went dead. For a long time, I sat there, the phone still in my hand, the mountains silent around me. There were no tears, no grand revelation, just a sense of something loosening, like a knot finally untied. Later that afternoon, I walked out onto the porch. The air was warm, the sun gentle. A bright red cardinal landed on the railing, cocking its head at me like it was studying my face. Elaine used to say cardinals were messengers, signs that those we love never really leave us. Did I do the right thing? I asked softly, my voice barely above a whisper. The bird chirped once, clear and bright, then flew off into the trees. I smiled. For the first time since Elaine died, I felt like she was here, not haunting me, but watching quietly, proud of what I'd finally learned. Because the truth was, love isn't about rescuing people. It's about giving them the space to rescue themselves. I'd spent 30 years mistaking control for care, thinking that protecting my son from failure was the same as loving him. But love without consequence isn't love at all, it's fear. Fear of loss, fear of letting go. That Christmas Eve, when he called me a parasite, I thought it was the cruelest moment of my life. But now I know it was the moment everything began to change. It was the night I stopped trying to fix the man my son had become and started letting him find the man he could still be. The wind shifted through the trees, carrying the scent of pine and spring rain. I looked out across the valley and whispered to no one in particular, peace doesn't come from avoiding pain. It comes from surviving it. And in that moment, surrounded by the quiet beauty of Silver Ridge, I finally understood what Elaine had meant when she called this place our sanctuary. It wasn't the cabin. It wasn't even the mountain. It was the strength to face what you can't change and the grace to let go of what you must.